You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Welcome, fellow patriots. Get ready for an hour of unabashedly pro-American, pro-conservative, and pro-biblical principles. This is the Blake Johnson Program.
Well, hello America, welcome to the Blake Johnson Program on the Lanterns Radio Network. Thanks for joining us here on this somber Monday evening. I say that due to what happened last week. As you are well aware, we've had a really, really hard week in this country. And I really want to spend some time and address that. Not as your typical conservative commentator, not as someone with an agenda other than the truth, other than furthering the advancement of our morality, of what we claim to believe in. I want to speak to you I want to speak to you as a concerned American citizen, as a concerned Christian, as someone who is concerned about the future of this country, but more specifically, the future of Christianity. And it has in large part to do with the shooting that took place in Florida. 17 dead, most of them children, some critically injured, some still in the hospital. We have yet to hear the conditions of all of them and what's going to happen. Just a horrific, horrific event. And I tell you, there are multiple ways that I want to address this, because you have the ridiculous media, the fringe media, which basically covers almost all of the left. And the way that they are reporting this. Almost immediately after this took place, you would think people who claim to care about human life, who claim to care about innocent life, would leave politics aside for just a few moments and come together and try to be there for one another. But no, that's not what happened. Immediately, politics was drawn into this. Immediately, people like you and I were blamed as essentially the perpetrators of this shooting, of this mass murder. The President of the United States even was blamed for this. What the heck does Donald Trump have to do with a madman going into a school and murdering murdering over a dozen people in the school, 17 total around the area? What does he have to do with that? What do you and I have to do with that? What does the NRA have to do with that? It's mind-blowing. But again, the left, in large part, the left in this country, particularly in the media, but also on social media, bring up politics. They don't try to be there and comfort those who are hurting. None of that. In fact, there was a story of a father who lost his child, and he was being interviewed, and he was wearing a Trump shirt, I don't know if it was a Make America Great Again shirt or if it was just a Trump Pence 16 shirt. It had the word Trump on it. He was a Trump supporter, obviously. And instead of people mourning with this father who lost his innocent child, people on social media instead said, well, because you were a Trump supporter, you kind of had this coming. Excuse me? He had this coming? Why? Because he's a Republican? Because he holds a different political viewpoint than you do? Because he believes that people should be able to defend themselves? It's sick. It's absolutely sick. Meanwhile, you have this congresswoman, I think she's a congresswoman, Kamala Harris, have the audacity to go out on the media and say to the effect of, we have to be concerned about the future of our children. We have to be concerned that children their lives are being taken away. This Democratic, this far-left congresswoman saying that she is so distraught at the loss of innocent human life, particularly children. Meanwhile, she has a 100% rating with NARAL, a pro-abortion organization. So you see the hypocrisy going on all over the place. And as someone who is just observing this, it breaks my heart. It really does. How do we move forward if the first reactions that we have are to go after each other politically speaking? I'm not saying that we can't have debate. Of course we can. But there's a time and place for that. And it had me thinking, because right now the message out there from the left is we've got to do something about guns. Guns are the problem. And on the right, well, it's a mental health issue. Or we've got to beef up security. We've got to arm the teachers. We've got to do this and do that. By the way, I'm not necessarily saying I'm opposed to any of that. But especially after being in church over the weekend, it really made me ponder just how upside down our priorities are. You have the left saying that this is a gun problem. You have the right saying this is a mental health problem. That this is a lack of guns. We need more guns. Whether or not you agree with either side isn't the point. Again, I'm not saying that I necessarily disagree with the idea that we should beef up security. But make no mistake, there's something much deeper going on in this country beyond guns, beyond mental health, beyond drugs, beyond alcohol. Much deeper. And I'm going to say it, and I know this won't be popular, and I know many people don't want to talk about this. They think it's cliche. They think it's just a way to escape the problem. No, this is the problem. This is the problem. There are other issues as well, but they're symptoms of the disease. The disease is what we should really be focusing on, but no one wants to talk about it. Well, here it is. This isn't a gun problem. This isn't a mental health problem. This is a sin problem, ladies and gentlemen. Make no mistake. This is a sin problem. We have declined, morally speaking, as a people, as a country. I don't think I need to remind you about things like Roe v. Wade, how many public schools have taken God out of their schools. You can't pray, you can't teach God. Not, of course, not all public schools are like that, but many of them are, and they are increasing. You have secularism permeating throughout the schools, abortion facilities, gay marriage being accepted as, oh, it's just fine and dandy. It seems like almost everything that we as people used to deem as morally wrong, as something that we shouldn't just praise as upright and righteous. I'm not saying that we have to, make a federal law making gay marriage illegal, I mean, that's not what I mean. I'm talking about us as people, as those who claim to be Christian. We used to be a nation that truly and deeply valued our Judeo-Christian roots. Back when the country was first founded, our founders, by and large, were deeply religious men. George Washington, Samuel Adams, and many, many others. Noah Webster. Then the list goes on and on. Congress used to read from Scripture and pray before each session. God used to be the priority instead of a hindrance. He used to be someone that people looked to for wisdom and guidance. Now, God is, well, he's whoever you want him to be. He could be a force surrounding us. He could be in nature. He could be multiple gods. He just can't be the Christian God. Can't have that. And you certainly, oh my gosh, you certainly cannot believe in those things in public. You can do whatever you want behind closed doors, but don't you dare bring that into our government. Don't you dare bring it into the media. Don't you dare bring it into any aspect of society that challenges our viewpoint, because we can't handle it. We cannot handle it. Folks, I'm just here to tell you that I don't really care, honestly, what anybody else says. I don't. Even those on the right, even those I agree with on many things. The fact that we are so scared to talk about this, the fact that we are so willing to just brush it off. You know what? I don't care if talking about this makes me a crazy person. I don't care if it makes me abnormal or weird. I am proud to be that. I am proud to be weird. I am proud to be labeled as every name under the sun, every insult under the sun. But that doesn't take away from the real problem. And it's sin. It is our rejection of God. It's our rebellion against God and his principles found in Scripture. He even says, righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a disgrace to any people. We are no exception. We've seen it time and time again throughout world history. Societies rise and fall. Societies will promote God, will make God the cornerstone of their system. And then over time, the people will reject him. And then, not too long after that, they crumble and they fall. Societies, by the way, that lasted a lot longer than this nation has so far. And look what we're doing right now. Is there hope? Well, there's always hope. But the hope isn't in man. The hope isn't in a new law. The hope isn't in some great, compelling argument that either side could make that could somehow fix this problem. The solution is Jesus Christ. Period. I'm not saying that we can't talk about policy. I'm not saying that we have to just throw up our hands and say, well, there's nothing that can be done. That's not what I'm saying. But our first priority has to be to fix ourselves. Until we fix ourselves, this never goes away. And of course, as long as we live in a fallen world, it'll never go away completely. But make no mistake, the increase in not just shootings, but the increase in crime, the increase in divorce, the increase in marital infidelity, the increase in, people being dishonest, dishonorable, the lack of integrity, all of these things linked together have to do with sin. And that's the truth. I'll be right back on the Blake Johnson program. Stay tuned. I really don't want to come off as dismissive of things that concern people like you and me. I mean, the fact that the left is so willing to go after your Second Amendment rights, the right to protect yourself, the fact that they will label people like you and me as evil, as crazy people, it is concerning to me. And we should be engaged in the fight, absolutely. But we also have to understand that the ultimate fight is against the principles of darkness, is against the evil nature that's within all of us. Left, right, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, doesn't matter. And I believe that we can find solutions. I really believe that. But the solution isn't going to come from politicians. It's not. It really isn't. The solution has to come from a higher power. It has to come from us relying on Him. Another thing I wanted to address, and this is completely off topic, but it does place some connection into what I just talked about. I went and saw the Black Panther movie over the weekend, and it was really, really good, I have to say. It was a very political movie. Probably the most political movie Marvel has released in quite a while. And I went into it, I'm just going to be straight up with you. I went into it being very nervous because, quite frankly, I really get tired of Hollywood screwing up, well, virtually everything. But I love superhero flicks. I love Marvel superheroes. I love DC superheroes. And it just seems like more and more and more people will inject their agenda into movies, TV shows, books, you name it. And I just was concerned that this was going to, instead of taking an opportunity to create something that could speak to everybody and unite all of us, that it would instead use that platform to further divide and say how much of a racist country America is, how terrible white people are, yada, yada, yada. Because for those of you who aren't familiar with Black Panther, he's of course, a Marvel superhero, but he's from Wakanda, which obviously isn't a real place, but it's a a country in Africa full of black people. Which, I mean, obviously I don't have a problem with that, but the thing is, you know, many of these Hollywood elites obviously are liberal. And I don't know how many of you watch DC TV shows like Arrow and The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow and Supergirl and things like that. Even some of their movies too. Oftentimes they will try to inject a bunch of politics into it. And it just gets so tiring after a while. I mean, look, if you're going to make if I want to go see a film that bashes America and virtually everything that I believe in, I'll go watch a Michael Moore film. Simple as that. But there are young people, there are those who just want to get away from politics. Doesn't matter if you're liberal or conservative. They just want to find something they can enjoy without a bunch of politics seeped into it. So when I found out this had a lot of politics in it, I was really concerned. But I thought it was a very, very good film. I'm not going to spoil anything for you if you haven't seen it yet. I just want to talk about something that I found really interesting and important in the film. So, Black Panther, his villain is... I can't remember his name. But he's played by Michael B. Jordan. He played Apollo Creed's son in the Creed movie most recently. He was also, I think, Human Torch in that terrible Fantastic Four reboot from a few years back. He's done some things, but he played the villain. This was basically, the best way I can describe it, it was a Martin Luther King versus a Malcolm X type of situation. And the Martin Luther King guy was the good guy, was Black Panther. And the message that I found throughout much of this movie was Black Panther going up against this Malcolm X type of villain whose response to, you know, the problems of slavery and you know, their ancestors and what they had to go through was to respond with violence, with anger, with revenge. All these different things. But Black Panther responded the opposite way. In fact, I think the best line of that film was during the end credits scene. Marvel has this reputation for making an end credits scene, like I think 2 of them. But the first one, he's standing before the United Nations, and Black Panther, he says, paraphrasing, that it doesn't matter your race, your religion, your background. The time has come to move past our differences and find things that we can agree on, find things that we can come together on. And I think the best line of that film was when he said, quote, "There are more things that connect us than divide us." And that felt very Martin Luther King Jr.-esque. Felt like something that he would say. In fact, he did say. But I'll be honest, too, there were some things that I wasn't a big fan of. It wasn't necessarily anything that was huge that I almost walked out of the theater of. It was just, you know, several references to America's past, and especially the one line at the very end, well, at the climax of the film, that was like, okay, whatever. But still, I think the overall message was positive. It was, yes, we've got problems. But that doesn't mean we use that as an excuse to become the very thing that we claim to despise. And that we can use our mistakes to be better people for it. And there were some white people in the movie too. It was mostly black people, but there were a couple white people. One in particular, Martin Freeman, who played Bilbo Baggins in the Hobbit series. He wasn't portrayed as this idiot, racist kind of guy. And in fact, he helped out the heroes of that movie, and it was kind of inspiring, honestly. I will say one negative. If I had to put down a negative, it would be the overabundance of paganism in the movie. It wasn't obsessively bad. It wasn't like, drowning in it, but it was there quite a bit. And just this idea of almost a pantheistic kind of view. Maybe it's just me, but that's what I got out of it. So I could have done it without that. But I still thought, this is a movie that could really bring people together in a culture and an environment that is very divided and at each other's throats. I think this is a movie that could really transform people and really get them to think differently, possibly. But on the one hand, while I do agree that there's a lot of things that unite us, we also have to recognize that there are deep, fundamental things that do divide us, and in all reality probably should divide us, as Christians especially. It's like I was saying in the previous segment. There is a sin problem. And just being a good person doesn't make the problem go away. So while I do appreciate the message of that movie, I would add to it as well. So I would encourage you to go see it. I think it's a good movie. I think you will walk away probably having a couple disagreements with some of the points made, but overall, feeling inspired. I was inspired, and you guys know me. If I see a bunch of political bullcrap in it, I'm more than willing to walk out. And I will tell you, this was junk. But I honestly didn't think it was that way. I really didn't. I'm not saying that, the people who made the movie don't view it from a pretty liberal sort of way. They probably do. But Marvel has done this. Marvel has a very good track record of trying to find ways to bring people together. You saw it in the Captain America Civil War movie. They presented both sides of a very heated topic, of a highly debated topic. But they handled it in such a great way that people from either side could watch the movie and walk out feeling like their side was well represented. And honestly, as someone who just enjoys seeing a good film, as someone who enjoys seeing something told in a good way, I can deal with that. I don't have to have all these Christian messages in it, although I would like that, but I'm willing to start somewhere, if that makes sense. I'm willing to work with what I've got, what we've got. It doesn't have to be perfect. I think this is a really good first step in healing the wounds that have been reopened in our country. So, go see Black Panther. You will really enjoy that film. And even if you're not a big superhero movie, again, it's a pretty political movie. I mean, there's a lot of political stuff in it. But even if you're not a big superhero fan, I would go see it anyway, just to experience that and see what your take on it is. Maybe you have a different opinion. That's totally fine. But as someone who's so cynical when it comes to these kinds of movies, it was a breath of fresh air. At least for now. At least for now. All right, going to take a break, and I have an important guest and an important conversation coming up with an attorney about the university system and university bias towards men in situations of sexual harassment. This is a conversation you do not want to miss. It's really, really fascinating. We'll do that right when we come back on this, the Blake Johnson program on the Lanterns Radio Network.
You're listening to the Lanterns Radio Network. We are the network dedicated to empowering the individual, illuminating the truth, defending American exceptionalism, and inspiring future generations. Stay connected and get involved at lanterns.buzz for great radio. Get commentary and news of the day. Lanterns.buzz.
Welcome back, everyone. This is the Blake Johnson program on Lanterns Radio Network. Joining me right now on the show is Michelle Owen. She is an attorney in Nashville, Tennessee, and a managing partner at Aggie Owens & Cooper. She's also a spokesperson for SAVE, which is Stop Abusive and Violent Environments, and has written and spoken regularly on TV and radio about university bias in the case of sexual assault allegations and the dangers of taking away the due process rights of students. Hello, Michelle, and thank you for being a part of the show today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I really wanted to bring you on the show and talk to you because I've been interested in this Me Too movement and how it's grown, and it seems like in many cases this movement, which started as a response to Harvey Weinstein and things like that, it seems to be growing into a different kind of movement, and you've spoken some about this on TV and radio as well. I'd like to start by asking you about this idea of victim-centered investigations. I actually wasn't too familiar about this specific term, but these are basically where the investigator assumes that the person claiming sexual assault against them is telling the truth, and the burden of proof therefore lies on the accused rather than the accuser. So could you tell us more about that and why it's wrong for either a law enforcement or just investigators in general to simply believe someone if they say they are raped or sexually assaulted?
Yeah, sure. This is one of my hot buttons here because, on its face, saying believe the victim sounds great. Why wouldn't you believe a victim? Of course. Well, what everyone forgets or what they don't know when they say that phrase or hear it is that what that means is that you are just taking away the person that's being accused due process rights from the outset. Because if you start an investigation believing there is in fact a victim, then you've already determined that there's guilt. And if you're going to believe everything the victim says, then you believe who she said did in fact do what she is accusing them of. And that's without any investigation or any fairness at all. I mean, that's what due process is. It's fairness. It's being fair. And when the criminal justice system investigates things, what they do is the police are an impartial investigator. Now, I know a lot of times they're not portrayed that way, and in fact, some of them probably aren't. But when it gets down to it, the way our legal system works, the police will investigate, and then they have to have enough evidence before the prosecutor will take something and actually press charges against somebody for it or try to find them, even take it to a trial, where then they'll be found guilty of a jury of their peers. So the whole due process is very centered on there being an impartial investigation from the beginning. And when you have trauma-centered investigations, you're completely derailing that, and you don't have it. You have somebody who goes into an event looking for ways to prove what they think has happened. And that's just not only unfair, but it's illegal, and it's against the Constitution. It's completely unconstitutional, and I'm not sure why all of these intelligent people out there are not seeing this. At some point, everyone's going to open their eyes and realize that we're all getting snowed and that this is not in any way a good thing. And I'll stop there for a minute because, I'm a lawyer. I'll just keep talking if you let me. but I have a lot more to say on it if you'd like to hear it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, and what you said is so true. This goes against the very fabric of our nation, our Constitution, our laws, the very idea of who we are as free people. Who started this idea of believe the victim investigations? Where did this come from?
Well, I think it actually was started initially, about 10 years ago, but at the core of it are different feminist movements or groups. A lot of groups, there's actually been a Department of Justice complaint filed against one group called End Violence Against Women International because they have received millions of dollars in federal grant money to do this very thing, to teach not only school professionals and officials, but also law enforcement professionals how to do trauma-centered investigations. So the answer to your question is that it is left feminist women's groups that are behind it. And, who initially came up with the Me Too, I'm not really sure the individual person, but I can tell you who's pushing it, and it's the women's groups.
Oh, what a surprise. Seems to be the same group of people each time. And this is kind of disturbing too because, part of your job, you focus a lot on defending the accused, the male victims of sexual misconduct allegations, which I would think has got to be a difficult job, especially today. Explain how this climate, this movement, if you will, that we live in has affected your job as an attorney and your mission to make sure that every person has a chance to defend themselves.
Well, these falsely accused men, this part of my practice has actually taken over. There are so many more false allegations against men on college campuses than ever before, and I think in general against men. I mean, you look at the recent comedians and politicians. Some of them are actually, have been sexual harassers or sexual assaulters, but some of them haven't. They've just had a bad date, and it's been publicized. So it has just taken over in the climate that is present today. But it all really started because in 2011, under the Obama administration, the Department of Education issued some new guidance to universities and colleges that receive federal funding and instructed them on how to handle sexual assault. And the ways they said to handle it were very unfair. But it all started there. That's why this part of my practice started overflowing, because of the complete lack of due process that men started receiving back in 2011. And it's gotten better. Betsy DeVos has rescinded those directives, but it is not fixed. It's not all the way where it's supposed to be yet. So there are still a lot of problems going on. And it is a difficult climate. It's a very anti-male climate right now.
Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine so. And, I mean, they seem to be heading in a good direction, like you said, with Betsy DeVos now. But what's to say the next administration comes in, maybe it's a Democrat administration, things could become even more difficult. We just don't know. This is why things have to be solved at a more, fixed solution, a more, permanent solution. And I tell you, just reading about this, talking about this, it really does cause me concern for the future. Like we were talking about before, we were a nation that was built in large part on the idea of due process, on the idea of innocent until proven guilty. And, I'd like to think that most Americans still believe in that, but it seems to be this growing group of people that are in this movement that are using this as an excuse to go specifically after men, regardless of their innocence. I can't remember the name of the celebrity, but I think she said infamously that she doesn't really care if the men she's accusing is innocent. If innocent men have to, be taken down over this, that's a small price to pay. And I'm thinking that, to me, that's going to wind up burning. That's going to wind up burning you if you're not careful. What happened to this notion of innocent until proven guilty? Why are those accusing sexual assault treated so differently from seemingly every other group, making a significant accusation towards another person.
Well, you're right. It is being treated differently, and I think it's very bizarre that it is. But the sexual assault, which, is rape, is a felony, and we're talking about treating that type of crime particularly differently than all other crimes, and waiving due process and determining that people are guilty at the outset. And if you read some of the rules and the pamphlets put out by some of these groups, like in Violence Against Women, it says that when you are an investigator, you're supposed to throw away any evidence that disproves what the girl is saying. And you're supposed to try to write to make her look more innocent. If there is anything that makes her look guilty, leave it out. So basically exculpatory evidence. If, there's evidence that the guy really didn't do this, then you throw it out, or you say, well, that just proves that she was assaulted, because people who've been assaulted are confused and their brains can't track things right, and so they get confused, and that just proves that she's been assaulted, or else she wouldn't have said something that so clearly was false. So, all of that just goes together with this whole lack of due process and the idea that this is just being taken away. And I don't know how people, well, I guess I do know how people are stomaching this, because they don't see it happening to them or to anybody close to them. Right now, it's still far off. But what people need to understand is that when you start taking away due process for one individual, then you're slowly going to take it away from everybody, and you're going to be living in a dictatorship. You're not going to have the freedoms that we have and that we take for granted every day. People don't realize how much freedom we really do have. But the fact that you have to be proven guilty before, and not proven, you don't have to prove that you're innocent, is a big deal. If you think back to the Amanda Knox trial, their appellate process in Italy is where you got that first chance of real due process. Their first trial was really what we're seeing on college campuses, where if you take everything that goes in favor of the person who's doing the accusing, and you add it all up, if that makes her guilty, then she is, and you throw out everything else. And that's what happened to Amanda Knox, and we watched her sit behind, bars for 6 years. If y'all remember that story. I mean, I'm thinking most people probably do. But that's where we're headed if we don't watch it. And that's why people like SAVE and groups like SAVE are fighting this.
Well, I mean, it's a good thing that you all are out there are doing this, because, when I think about this, it's like, nobody wants someone who's been sexually assaulted to be afraid to come out and talk about it. I mean, nobody wants that, but at the same time, the whole idea of due process is you give both sides an equal opportunity to defend themselves. And I'm thinking, for the ones who go out there and just accuse people regardless of their innocence, it makes the ones who actually were assaulted feel like they can't come out, because people are just going to automatically think that they're just out to get somebody. On the other hand, it also can make the ones who are accused be afraid, because they feel like they have no shot at really defending themselves. They feel like it's not really a fair process. Have you seen that, like with the men that you've tried to represent, the people that you've tried to represent who are being accused? What's their attitude like towards this in regards to defending themselves?
Well, most people that this happens to have never had anything like this happen to them, and they haven't known anybody that it's happened to. And so their first reaction is disbelief, because they did not rape the girl. Most of my guys that I defend have either not done anything at all, or they've been jerks or had bad manners, but they haven't sexually assaulted anyone. And the girls on college campuses are being taught to mix up the two. They're being taught that if you aren't treated with respect and, with good manners, that was sexual assault. And that's not the case. Being rude and disrespectful is not sexual assault. It's called dating a jerk and going out with somebody you shouldn't have, or doing something that you regret the next day. But just because you regret it, or just because you thought he was in a committed relationship and he wasn't, does not make it sexual assault. And the girls are really getting misinformation about this, and it's confusing to them. And which is why I think a lot of times you see girls coming forward 8 months after the initial event, which is, by the way, very typical, that these girls come forward months and months after the allegation. And then the guys are completely confused, and the girl basically sat around and thought about it and talked to her friends long enough, and finally somebody talked her into believing that it was actually sexual assault that happened to her instead of just a bad date,
Right.
a bad sexual experience. So, so they're in shock. The guys are really suffering emotionally. They get very depressed. A lot of guys become suicidal over this because it's such a traumatic event that happens to them.
I would imagine so. I mean, this is a really hard environment to be in. So again, I mean, this is just another reason why groups like this have to be out there in order to, make sure that everyone's rights are being well represented. Thank you so much, Michelle, for being on the show. Really do appreciate it. Can you, before you go, where can people go to find out more about SAVE, the work you're doing, and how to get involved in general to promote this message and be a part of this movement that you're a part of?
Well, they can go to saveservices.org, and anything that you want to know about Title IX, sexual assault, the cultural phenomenon that's going on right now, you can find it at saveservices.org. They will also connect you to other groups that can be support groups if you are going through this. And if you need attorney representation, by the way, if this happens to you or anyone you know, you need an attorney at the front end or you'll never have a chance of success. But I can be reached at title9representation.com.
Title9representation.com. All right. Well, thank you so much for being a part of the show and for just sharing your experience and your knowledge. I mean, this is something that has got to be talked about because I feel like if we don't talk about it now, it's just going to get more and more dangerous and more, out there as time goes on. So thank you for being a part of the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. We'll be right back in just a minute. Program on the Lanterns Radio Network. Thanks for staying with us this hour. Hope you've enjoyed the show. Really enjoyed talking to Michelle Owens. She's had a lot of really interesting points to say. She's been on Fox News before. She's been on different radio shows talking about this topic, and I think it's really important. I mean, you hear so much from the media, from the left, from the news media about sexual harassment against women, which is obviously very important to point out. But I feel like we're getting to this point where we're focusing so much on the accuser rather than the accused to see if, maybe the accused isn't guilty. And I think it's important that we don't use this movement, this Me Too movement, to the extreme of making it about a witch hunt, and that's what it seems to be turning into. It's certainly not a positive movement to, in some ways, positive movement to, bring out the best in men and women and to encourage them to be their higher, better selves that they possibly can be. So anyway, I thought that was very, very enlightening. All right, a couple stories I want to get to before we close up shop here for the week. There's been some controversy surrounding Lori Ingraham and her comments on Fox News late last week about LeBron James. I guess the two are going back and forth with each other. And this is, I tell you, sometimes I would really like it if Lori Ingraham would just talk about something else. I mean, why are people making such a big deal out of what LeBron James has to say? I frankly don't give a care what LeBron James has to say. I think he's an idiot, and quite frankly, I think he's a jerk. So that's why I don't really listen to him. I don't listen to him anymore anyway. But apparently, LeBron's comments about Donald Trump, which were, quite frankly, pretty sickening, they sparked outrage from Laura Ingraham, and this is what she had to say.
Must they run their mouths like that? Unfortunately, a lot of kids and some adults take these ignorant comments seriously. Look, there might be a cautionary lesson in LeBron for kids. This is what happens when you attempt to leave high school a year early to join the NBA. And it's always unwise to seek political advice from someone who gets paid $100 million a year to bounce a ball. Oh, and LeBron and Kevin, you're great players, but no one voted for you. Millions elected Trump to be their coach. So keep the political commentary to yourself, or as someone once said, shut up and dribble.
Okay, so there are obviously more than a couple things wrong with what she said. First, the most obvious. Laura, you can't just tell someone not to speak, okay? You're saying just shut up and dribble? And you're making fun of the fact that he's a celebrity and he clearly has ignorance. I mean, he does. Like I said, I think he is very ignorant when it comes to his political viewpoints and the fact that he doesn't seem to really understand a lot of how our government runs and works. He's just very ignorant. That's how I see it anyway. But also, as Chris Long from the Philadelphia Eagles pointed out, how many celebrities have you had on your show? Has Fox News had on their show? People in Hollywood, people in sports. I mean, sounds a little hypocritical, don't you think? And it certainly hurts the cause of conservatism. It certainly hurts the advancement of the conservative argument. Because how can people take us seriously when, top talking heads like her on the right-wing media are saying things like that? It just puts us all in a bad light. So my advice, and also from the left, they are also overreacting to this, saying that she's a racist for this. No, she's not, okay? She's adopted people from third world countries, okay? She is not a racist. I think she worked for Justice Clarence Thomas. So shut up, left. Just shut up. You have no moral authority on this either. But at the same time, Laura, you've got to drop this and just move on. Like I said, just stop caring about what LeBron James has to say. I don't care. And honestly, I don't know that he has as big of an influence over people as you might think. I really don't. I don't ever hear anyone saying, wow, did you hear what LeBron James has to say? I don't hear that, okay? Maybe it's just me. But, alright, the second thing I want to move on to is this ridiculous point that Joy Behar from The View made. And by the way, who watches The View? Seriously, who watches that show? It's just full of, yakking hens in a room that clearly also show a whole, utter lack of knowledge when it comes to, well, virtually everything. But Joy Behar took it upon herself to make fun of Vice President Mike Pence for daring to say that he talks to Jesus. And, oh my gosh, Jesus talks back.
I don't know if I want that. It's one thing to talk to Jesus. It's another thing when Jesus talks to you.
Exactly. Okay, well, that's different.
That's different. That's called mental illness, if I'm not correct.
But I think...
Hearing voices.
Hearing voices in your head. That's a mental illness. Meanwhile, this is the same woman who thinks it's perfectly sane and rational if you're a man who feels like he's a woman, or if you're a woman who feels like she's a man. Oh, that's perfectly sane and rational. Nothing wrong about that. I mean, you understand how ridiculous this sounds? The idea that, oh, you can talk to Jesus, but no, he can't talk back to you. That would be like me going up to a grave site, to my grandparents' grave, and talking to that grave, and then expecting a response. There's nothing in common there. She doesn't even understand what it means to talk to God. It means being moved by the Spirit, being moved in a direction that's consistent with His Word and with what Jesus talks about. But she doesn't understand that. The other difference between you and me, Joy, is your God is still in that grave, but mine is risen and's alive. So, just saying. Alright, that's going to do it for the Blake Johnson program. Thanks everyone for stopping by, tuning in. Really appreciate it. We will see you back here next time. on this Monday. Same time, same place. Have a great rest of your week, everyone, and God bless.